A Viking winter was worse than you think. Imagine waking before sunrise inside a Viking longhouse. Except sunrise will not come for hours. The fire in the center of the room has almost died. Smoke hangs beneath the roof. Your clothes are damp, the floor is cold, and somewhere in the darkness, an animal is moving behind a wooden partition. Outside, snow has covered the path. Inside, your family has enough food for perhaps 6 more weeks. The problem is that nobody knows whether winter will end in 6 weeks. When people imagine a Viking winter, they often picture a comfortable wooden hall surrounded by snow. There is a roaring fire, a table covered with food, and warriors drinking while a storm passes outside. But for most Norse families, winter was not a beautiful pause between adventures. It was the most dangerous calculation of the year. And that calculation began long before the first snowflake fell. Most people in Viking-age Scandinavia lived on farms. Their survival followed the annual cycle of plowing, planting, grazing animals, harvesting crops and storing food. The farm was not merely where they lived. It was their food supply, workplace, shelter, heating system and emergency reserve. Historiska.se 1. Every warm month was preparation for the cold ones. During spring, fields had to be prepared. During summer, livestock needed to graze while families repaired buildings, gathered plants, fished and produced the tools and clothing they required. Then came autumn, the season when almost everything had to be completed at once. Grain needed to be harvested before bad weather destroyed it. Hay had to be cut and dried. Firewood had to be collected. Fish and meat had to be preserved. Roofs needed repairs, and animals had to be brought closer to shelter. If a family entered winter with full storage containers, dry firewood and enough fodder, it had a chance. But a poor harvest could not be corrected in January. There was no second crop beneath the snow. No market guaranteed to remain open. No distant supply system waiting to rescue an isolated household. A mistake made in August could remain hidden for months, until the family opened its final container of grain. And Scandinavia did not experience one single kind of winter. A coastal farm might endure freezing rain, violent wind and constant dampness. An inland settlement could face deep snow and frozen paths. Farther north, daylight became extremely limited, making outdoor work and travel even harder. Cold was only part of the problem. Darkness changed the rhythm of life. Without electric light, many tasks depended on the weak glow of the central hearth, small lamps or burning wood. The fire cooked meals, dried clothing and provided warmth. In many longhouses, it was also the main source of light. Vikingar.historiska.se 2. But the fire that kept the family alive also filled the building with smoke. Viking-age houses generally lacked modern chimneys and glass windows. Smoke escaped through openings in the roof, but ventilation was limited, so a large amount could remain inside. National Museum of Denmark, 3. Imagine spending months in that air. Smoke above you. Damp wool around you. Cooking smells, stored food, people working, children sleeping, and possibly livestock housed at one end of the building. The longhouse was not a spacious lodge divided into private rooms. It was a shared survival machine. Benches along the walls could be used for sitting, storage and sleeping. Work happened near the fire. Food had to be protected. Clothing had to be repaired. Animals needed care. Privacy was limited because efficiency mattered more. When winter arrived, every living thing on the farm became part of the same calculation. During summer, cattle, sheep and goats could graze outdoors. During winter, they ate what the household had stored. That meant the family was not only counting human meals. It was counting bundles of hay. How much remained? How many animals could it support? Would the cold end early, or continue for another month? An animal was valuable. It might provide milk, wool, offspring, transport or labor. But it also consumed resources every day. Keeping too many animals could exhaust the fodder. Reducing the herd meant sacrificing future value to survive the present. This was one reason autumn slaughter was so important. A household could reduce the number of animals it needed to feed and preserve part of the meat for winter. But preservation had to work. Meat and fish could be dried or salted. Milk could be transformed into cheese and heavily salted butter, which lasted longer and supplied valuable fat during the cold season. National Museum of Denmark, 4. These foods were not simply traditional recipes. They were survival technology. A piece of dried fish represented time the family would not need to spend searching for food in freezing weather. A container of salted butter represented energy stored from a warmer season. A sack of dry grain represented weeks of meals. But stored food created a new kind of fear. Moisture could damage grain. Rodents could reach supplies. Containers could break. Meat could spoil. A leaking roof could ruin food that had required months of work. Imagine discovering damp grain halfway through winter. The household now has several choices, and none of them are good. Eat smaller portions. Ask relatives or neighbors for help. Trade something valuable. Slaughter another animal. Or continue eating normally and hope spring arrives before the food disappears. The most frightening part was uncertainty. A family could count every sack, container and piece of preserved meat. But it could not know exactly how long the winter would last. Supplies planned for 12 weeks might suddenly need to survive 14. A storm could isolate the farm. Snow could cover familiar paths. A journey to another settlement could become dangerous. And even if food lasted, the house itself remained vulnerable. Wooden buildings required maintenance. Wind could damage the roof. Water could enter through worn sections. Dampness could spread through bedding, clothing, and stored materials. Repairs still had to be made, even in poor weather. Firewood also had to remain dry. A pile of wet fuel was not merely inconvenient. It threatened the household's ability to cook, work, and remain warm. This is why winter was not a season without labor. It was a season of enclosed labor. People spun wool, wove textiles, repaired clothing, carved wooden objects, maintained tools, prepared meals, and cared for animals. A warm wool garment represented a long production chain. Sheep had to be raised. Wool had to be collected, cleaned, and prepared. Fibers had to be spun into thread. Thread had to be woven into cloth. Cloth had to be cut and sewn. Then the garment had to be repaired again and again. There was no closet filled with replacements. A torn cloak or damaged shoe could become a serious problem for someone who still needed to work outside. And winter placed many people together inside the same limited space. A household might include children, elders, workers, relatives, guests, and people of different social status. For months, they shared food, warmth, smoke, noise, and responsibility. One person's illness affected everyone. One person's mistake could damage shared supplies. One argument could not be escaped by walking into another room. The longhouse protected people from the outside world, but it also trapped them together. Yet Norse families were not always completely alone. Relationships between neighbors and relatives mattered. Households exchanged goods, shared labor, and offered hospitality. Seasonal celebrations and gatherings brought people together, while storytelling, games, conversation, and craftwork made the long darkness more bearable. Hospitality and communal feasts were important parts of Viking Age social life. National Museum of Denmark, 3. Community could be another form of stored wealth. A family that had helped its neighbors during a good year might receive help during a bad one. But neighboring households faced the same winter. They could only share what they had. This is what made the season so dangerous. It rarely depended on one dramatic event. It was the accumulation of small failures. A harvest slightly smaller than expected. A roof that begins leaking. A few bundles of hay ruined by moisture. An animal becoming sick. Firewood burning faster than planned. A child needing more food. Snow remaining on the ground 2 weeks longer. Each problem reduced the household's margin of survival. The Viking Age is remembered for longships crossing oceans, merchants reaching distant markets and warriors appearing on foreign shores. But none of that began at sea. It began with people who understood the seasons. People who knew when to plant, when to cut hay, when to preserve fish and when to repair a roof. People who spent the warmer months preparing for an enemy that could not be defeated with a sword. Winter did not care how brave someone was. It did not care how many battles a warrior had survived. It only cared whether the food remained dry, whether the animals still had fodder and whether the fire continued burning. So do not picture a Viking winter as snow falling peacefully outside a warm hall. Picture a family opening its storage room. Picture them counting the remaining food. Picture smoke gathering beneath the roof as darkness arrives before the work is finished. Picture them waking each morning knowing that spring is coming. But not knowing whether their supplies will survive long enough to see it. The cold made winter painful. The uncertainty made it terrifying.